I never thought I'd feel invisible in my own family, not after 60 years of loyalty, hard work, and sacrifice. But when my doctor told me I needed surgery soon, $20,000 just to keep walking without crippling pain, my own children laughed in my face. "Dad, we just closed on the new house," my eldest said, his voice dripping with condescension over the phone. "It's $2 million, and you want us to spend $20,000 for you to play surgeon? You'll survive somehow." My chest tightened, the weight of disbelief pressing down harder than the pain in my leg. I could barely stand, and their words felt like a kick to my ribs. "20,000?" I managed to gasp. "It's 20,000 for the surgery, not the house." "Same difference," he snapped. "This house is a legacy. Your leg isn't." The irony hit me like a punch I couldn't dodge. The same kids I raised, the same ones I sacrificed for, were prioritizing a marble staircase over my health. I remembered every baseball game I missed, every sick day I worked double shifts so they could have their Christmas gifts, their college tuition, their vacations. And now they told me my life wasn't worth a down payment. I hung up, shaking. My wife, long gone, wouldn't have recognized this family anyway. My parents were gone too, buried deep under their own regrets. It was just me and a house full of children who had no sense of gratitude. I sat in my armchair, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what the doctor had said. Without surgery, I risked permanent disability, maybe even the inability to walk on my own again. My pride screamed at me not to beg, not to humiliate myself, but my body screamed louder. Pain shot up my leg in sharp, white-hot bursts every time I shifted. For 2 days, I did nothing. I called my kids again, hoping maybe my tone, my words, my desperation would make them see reason. It didn't. My daughter suggested I consider alternative medicine and reminded me that a limp might teach me humility. My youngest grandson said I could just walk it off like I did back in the 70s. By the 3rd day, reality hit hard. If I wanted to survive, I'd have to act alone. My pride burned, but survival burned brighter. I started crunching numbers on a pad of paper. Credit cards, personal loans, payday lenders, anything that could get me to the operating table. But nothing added up fast enough, and every solution came with a sting of humiliation and despair. I was alone, broken, and staring down the possibility of permanent damage. That night, I sat by my phone, staring at old family photos, remembering the little boy I once held in my arms, the graduations, the birthdays, and I realized something I didn't want to admit. They didn't care. Then I remembered James, my younger brother, broken in his own ways, living in a cluttered apartment, working odd jobs for years, always underestimated. I hated to think of asking him. He barely had enough for himself, scraping by as he always did. And yet, he was the only person in the world I could even imagine answering. I didn't call that night. I just stared at his old number, wondering if pride or desperation would win. I felt like a man trapped in his own body, surrounded by people who should love him most, but who chose everything else over his life. And that's when I promised myself, if I had to, I would survive on my own. If the world refused me, I'd find a way to make it right. And maybe, just maybe, James would be there when the time came. I went to sleep that night with the image of my children smiling over the plans for their $2 million house, and me lying in a hospital bed, ignored, betrayed, and alone.
The next morning, I woke up with a throbbing leg and a pounding heart. I'd made a plan overnight, or at least I thought I had. I called my children again, hoping maybe, just maybe, they would see reason. "Dad, you know we're buying a new house," my eldest said before I could even speak. $2 million. It's a huge investment. 20,000 for your surgery? That's life or death, I shouted, my voice cracking. I need surgery now, or I risk never walking again. A long pause. Then my daughter's sharp voice cut through the line. "You always dramatize, Dad. We're making a smart decision. You'll survive somehow. Everyone survives." I dropped the phone. The plastic hit the table with a dull thud, but it might as well have shattered. $20,000. That's all it took to save my life, and they couldn't scrape it together because they had their fancy new house to worry about. My own flesh and blood had turned into strangers, calculating which investments were more important than my health. I sat there for hours, staring at the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, the doctor's note, the estimate from the hospital, the MRI images, everything screaming urgency, everything my kids refused to acknowledge. My bank account was nearly empty, savings long spent on utilities and medical visits over the years, credit cards maxed out, payday loans offered nothing but desperation and absurd interest rates. Every number I ran made me feel smaller, weaker, more helpless than I ever thought possible. It was late when I finally called James. My heart raced and my pride quivered, but I needed someone who might care. "James, it's bad," I said, my voice low and tight. "I need surgery. 20,000. The kids, they won't help. They said they can't spare it because of the house. $2 million. But 20,000 for me? No." Silence, then a quiet sigh on the other end. "Damn," he muttered. I held my breath. Could he help? Could he? I don't have it all," he said finally. "You know that. But maybe I can do something." I wanted to cry. Relief surged, but it was bitter, mixed with shame and frustration. James didn't have a lot, but he had something they didn't, a willingness to act when it mattered most. I didn't hear from him again that night, and I was fine. I was used to being left alone. My children, my so-called family, had made their choice clear. The house came first, my life came last. By the third day, I realized waiting for my children to change their minds was useless. I started calling hospitals, negotiating payment plans, looking for loans I didn't qualify for. Every door closed in my face. Each rejection felt like another slap from the family who should have been there for me. Then came a knock at the door. My heart jumped. Could it be James? Could it be someone bringing hope, finally? I opened it to find nothing, just a neighbor checking if I needed groceries. I sank back into the chair, exhaustion and despair weighing on me. The night stretched long and quiet, filled with the echo of their indifference. By the fourth day, I realized I couldn't wait any longer. I called a local clinic, explaining my situation, the urgency, the lack of family support. They offered a partial payment plan, barely manageable, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. My mind raced with numbers, percentages, loans, options, anything. And then I remembered. James might be broke, but he had resourcefulness, stubbornness, and that quiet, relentless sense of loyalty I had always underestimated. If anyone could make a miracle happen in the middle of despair, it was him. I sent a text, short and deliberate. "I need help. Surgery. 20,000. Don't ask why. Just help if you can." I didn't know if he'd reply. I didn't know if he could. But I knew one thing. My kids abandoned me. My own flesh and blood had refused to pay 20,000 to save me. And if I didn't find a solution fast, I might not walk again. And somewhere far away, James read the message and thought. And that thought would change everything. Not immediately, not without struggle, but slowly, it sparked the plan that could save me. I lay in bed that night, my leg throbbing, my pride bruised, but for the first time in days, a tiny ember of hope flickered in the dark. The fourth morning began cold and gray. My leg throbbed like a drumbeat I couldn't escape. and every movement reminded me that time was running out. I couldn't just wait any longer. Surgery wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. I stared at my phone, willing it to buzz with a message from James. Nothing. I called again. No answer. I left a voicemail, my voice rough from worry and exhaustion. James, please, 20,000, surgery. I can't wait. Call me. I hung up, my hands trembling. The kids still hadn't responded. My son, busy calculating down payments and mortgage interest for the new $2 million house, didn't even bother to text back. My daughter, scrolling through Instagram, had probably never even read my plea. They were wrapped up in their lives, indifferent to mine. Hours passed, and I sank deeper into despair. I stared at the ceiling, the pattern of cracks blurred by pain and frustration. $20,000 wasn't just a number, it was my ability to walk again. Yet my own children treated it like spare change, easily sacrificed for something flashy and unnecessary. Then, mid-afternoon, a knock at the door startled me. My heart leaped. Could it be him? I opened the door. It was James. He looked older than his 55 years, though still strong. His face was lined from hard work, his hands scarred and calloused. He carried a small duffel bag, and for a moment I didn't understand what it could contain. "Dad," he said quietly, "we're gonna get you through this." I blinked, unsure if relief or guilt hit me first. "James, I didn't want to bother you. You've got enough on your plate." He shook his head. "You think I don't remember what it's like to be left behind, to be told you don't matter when it counts? Not this time." Without another word, he pulled out a bundle of bills. "This is part of it. Not all, but enough to start." I stared, my mouth dry. The stack of crumpled bills wasn't $20,000, but it was something tangible, a lifeline thrown into the storm. "James, I can't take this. You need those tools, that money." He interrupted. "I'll manage. You're walking again. That matters more than anything else." For the next few hours, we scrambled. Calls to the hospital, negotiations, partial payments, promises. Every second stretched into eternity, but slowly, methodically, we pieced together a plan to cover the $20,000 surgery. But James didn't stop there. He started making phone calls to his contacts, old colleagues, friends from the mechanic shop, even a cousin with a small construction business. Within the afternoon, he had arranged a way to cover the remaining balance. No questions asked, no judgment. I sat in the living room, exhausted, watching him move. Every step he took reminded me that loyalty and love aren't about grand speeches or dramatic gestures. They're about showing up when everyone else has turned away. I called my children once more, trying to reason, to make them see. My son's voice was flat. "Dad, we can't. The house comes first. I'm sorry." I hung up before the line even rang. And that was it. My children had chosen property over family. But James had chosen me. By evening, the hospital confirmed the surgery could proceed the next morning. I sat on the edge of the bed, cradling my leg, thinking about how easily my life had been dismissed, how close I had come to losing the chance to walk again. James leaned against the doorway. "You rest tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we fix this." I nodded, tears welling up, not just for the pain, not just for the betrayal, but for the rare, fierce loyalty that had finally arrived when I needed it most. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Family isn't always about who shares your blood. Sometimes it's about who refuses to let you fall, no matter the cost. The night stretched long and uneasy, filled with anticipation. I knew tomorrow would change everything, not just for my leg, but for the people who had ignored me and for the brother who refused to.
The morning arrived crisp and heavy, the hospital buzzing with the sterile energy of urgency and purpose. I sat on the gurney, my leg wrapped in swelling and bandages, my mind racing. I'd slept fitfully, the image of my children choosing a $2 million house over my $20,000 surgery looping in my head like a cruel drumbeat. James stood beside me, calm and steady, a quiet anchor in a storm of fear. "You'll be fine," he said softly. "I've got this. Just focus on getting better." The anesthesiologist asked me to count backward, but I barely heard the numbers. My thoughts were with the betrayal I had endured, my own flesh and blood turning their backs when I needed them most. And yet, even in that fear, I felt something else, a profound relief. James had refused to let me fall. He had chosen family when blood had failed me. Hours later, I woke in a haze of medication and dim lights. The pain was sharp but clean, controlled. My leg was bandaged, stable, and for the first time in weeks, I could imagine walking again. The nurse leaned over, checking vitals and speaking in calm, measured tones. "Surgery went well," she said. "If you follow the rehab plan, full recovery is expected." I exhaled slowly, letting the tension I didn't know I was holding seep out. James patted my shoulder, a small, quiet smile on his face. "See, I told you." But the relief was tempered with anger, the kind that burns slow and steady. I thought of my children, busy calculating interest rates and down payments for a house they'd never need to share with me. They had treated my life like an inconvenience, a number on a spreadsheet, while prioritizing luxury over survival. By evening, I'd managed a weak phone call with my son. I kept my voice steady, though my chest burned. "You do realize what you've refused?" I asked. "I told you, Dad," he replied flatly. "We have to think about the house. It's important. Can't afford 20 grand right now." I hung up before I could say more. Words were useless with people who measure love and loyalty in currency. James and I sat in the small hospital room, quiet except for the hum of machines and the distant clatter of carts down the hall. "They don't get it," I said finally, my voice low. "No," he replied, "but we do, and you're gonna walk again. That's what matters." I thought about the weeks ahead, rehab, slow steps, controlled pain. I thought about the hard work it would take to rebuild strength and trust in my body. And I thought about my children, who had made their choice, oblivious to the consequences. The first few days after surgery were a blur of physical therapy and careful movement. James stayed, tirelessly helping me navigate the small apartment, managing medications, arranging appointments. The more he moved, the more I realized the depth of what he had done. He hadn't just helped pay for surgery, he had refused to let me be abandoned. A week later, my children called again, hesitantly, their voices tight with embarrassment and guilt. We wanted to check on you," my son said, carefully choosing words that could excuse past actions. I listened, silent, letting the apology, or whatever it was, hang in the air. I didn't need it. James had shown me what family could be. Blood mattered less than loyalty and action. When I finally took my first careful steps without support, the sense of victory wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I had survived neglect, betrayal, and the cruelty of convenience. I had walked because someone refused to let me fall. And I knew, with a clarity that burned like the sun, that the reckoning with my children had only just begun.
Weeks passed. Each day my leg grew stronger, and so did my resolve. James had been relentless, patient, careful, but firm. He refused to let me stumble, either physically or emotionally. Watching him move around the apartment, managing therapy sessions, arranging groceries, even keeping track of bills, I felt a swell of gratitude. He hadn't just given me money, he had restored my life. Then came the day I decided it was time. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to confront. I called my children together, choosing a neutral spot, the lawyer's office downtown. I needed witnesses, documentation, someone impartial in case words turned into chaos. They arrived late, distracted, in suits pressed but eyes darting nervously.
The grandeur of the $2 million house they were about to buy clearly weighed more in their minds than the father sitting across from them. I didn't rise to their drama. I stayed seated, calm, letting silence fill the room for a long moment. "You refused me $20,000 for surgery," I said quietly, evenly. "Said you couldn't spare it because the house was more important. Do you understand what that means?" There was a shuffle, a muttered excuse from my son. "Dad, No, don't. Not a word until you hear me out." I laid out every detail, the cost, the delay, the risk of permanent damage. I spoke about their decision, their priorities, and how they had chosen material comfort over family, over life itself. I could see it in their faces, the flicker of shame, quickly hidden behind defensiveness. Then I told them about James, about his sacrifice, about how he had worked, scrimped, and risked everything to make sure I could walk again. And that's when I saw the shift. Their carefully built world of privilege and convenience didn't include this kind of loyalty, this kind of courage. "You had one job," I said, voice steady but sharp. "One small way to show that family matters, and you failed. But someone else, someone who had nothing, stepped up. Do you see the difference?" Silence. They couldn't argue, couldn't excuse, couldn't erase what had been done. I ended the meeting with a statement, not a question. You will see the consequences of your choices, not out of malice, not revenge, but accountability. And I hope one day you understand what it truly means to care for someone who raised you, who loved you, because loyalty isn't optional. They left, stiff, awkward, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't watch them go. I watched James, standing quietly behind me, a small smile of satisfaction on his face. He didn't need to say a word. His presence had said it all. Days later, I walked through the apartment without crutches for the first time. Each step was careful, deliberate, but steady. I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. Betrayal had been met with action, not resentment. Neglect had been answered with courage, and life finally felt balanced again. James and I celebrated quietly, takeout on the small kitchen table, the smell of fried chicken and greens filling the room. "We did it," he said softly. "You did it." "No," I corrected. "We did it." And in that moment, I realized the truth. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who refuses to let you fall, no matter the cost. If you've been moved by this story, make sure to subscribe for more real-life tales of courage, resilience, and justice. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever been let down when you needed someone most? Stories like this remind us that loyalty and action matter more than words.